everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's video I'm going to be drawing a rose in charcoal pencils, so this will be a little how-to on how I drew that, but I'll also talk about a few ways to give your charcoal drawings an extra pop by using certain techniques. So let's get started, and first we will be focusing on the background. For the background I used mainly a soft charcoal block, and I used this because it covers a large surface area very quickly, but also charcoal blocks are great for their intensity. So if you want super dark values in your charcoal pieces, a charcoal block is a great way to do that because it is a much darker pigment than the pencils, and I find that less powder leaves the paper as well. I like to use the charcoal block flat, so I would just lay it down on the paper and just glide that charcoal block smoothly across the paper, but for those little corners or edges, I angle the charcoal block so that I use the tip around those delicate areas, and that just keeps the lines smooth and doesn't interfere with the rose. So I think the best tip I have for getting in those darkest values as well is all about applying the correct amount of pressure, but also layers as well. So for example, in the background, if I wanted to darken up any values, I just press slightly harder onto the charcoal block, and that releases more pigment onto the paper. Be careful though, as charcoal blocks are very fragile, and the last thing that you want to be doing is snapping that block straight in half if you're not careful. Let's move on to the blending process, and for blending I mainly use paintbrushes, but you do need to be careful that you are picking the right paintbrushes for blending. If you have paintbrushes that aren't the right texture, it's going to be really hard for you to blend. I like to use a rounded brush head because I find that they have more condensed bristles, so it has that firmness for blending, but it also creates soft and subtle shading as well. If you are going for a soft pointed brush, these really aren't the best and most effective tool for blending because I find that they are very soft, so you're going to be applying a lot of pressure just to get those pencils to blend. You can also use lots of different sized paintbrushes as well, so for example a big brush for the backgrounds and small detailed brushes for small details. I also do like to pull up highlights in backgrounds as well, and I'm using the Kneaded eraser for that, and I'll talk more about erasers in a second. Also for blending I do like to use tissue paper, blending stumps and also cotton buds. I like to use either a 2B or 4B pencil to initially shade in those darkest values, and it doesn't matter if you are slightly messy with the process because everything is going to be blended out. It's important though that you do map in all of the shadows, outlines and general details in the rose or subject, because when you blend it's easy to lose details if you haven't applied those darker values. So I look at my reference photos so I know exactly where those outlines are, and what I do is I also like to make sure I shade in some lighter shadows as well, and I shade in the lighter values because it helps to add tone. To shade in lighter values, what I do is I use either the 2B or 4B pencil, but I just apply less pressure onto the paper. So when you apply less pressure, it fills in less paper grain so that the shading isn't so heavy and dark. It's also really important that where you have highlights, you leave those areas completely free of pencil, and this is because when you blend out all of the pencil, if you don't preserve white areas, they will become muddied and it's hard to get the highlights back once they are gone. shading, I also like to use the side of the pencil rather than applying shading with the tip of the pencil, and the main reason why I do this is because shading with the side of the pencil allows for an even distribution of charcoal over the paper. And sometimes when you do shading with the tip of the pencil, it means that you heavily concentrate pigment onto the paper, and you don't want that. So it's very important that with charcoal, you keep those layers really light as well, because if you apply too much pressure, the layers won't blend as well, because the charcoal powder will have been burnished into the paper already. What I also like to do is start to add in even darker shading with a 6B pencil, and you can also do this with a charcoal block as well, but you'll need to be careful with where you use the block. I use a 6B pencil because it's smaller and you can get in better details with a pencil, and I like to add more value down to areas before I blend so that it intensifies those values. So in a second we'll be moving on to the blending process for the rose. For blending, one of the most effective ways to get that charcoal blended out smoothly and softly with hardly any stubborn lines visible is by using circular motions. So circular motions helps to soften out the charcoal and get rid of any lines that are harder to blend. You also want to blend in circular motions because if you blend by using back and forth motions, that's going to create stop and start lines, but circles won't. When it comes to applying pressure, I'm really not applying a lot of pressure at all because it's blending out so easily, but if there are some areas that are not blending as well, I do apply a bit more pressure to the paper, and you should find that the charcoal will blend, especially as you've used light layers for the initial sketch process. For little details in the leaves, what I actually do is I blend by making sure that I go in the direction of the leaf details. So see how there is that sort of vertical shadow in the leaf? What I do is instead of blending with circular motions, I blend in the direction of the shadow. But I make sure to blend in one direction so that there's no harsh blending lines. I just keep going with the blending until I feel the charcoal has blended out smoothly and softly. To darken up any areas again, I go back in with a 6B pencil and I redefine any areas that I've lost a bit of value in, and this just helps me to increase that contrast in my drawings. I then like to blend the pencil out with the paintbrush. So once everything is blended and we have all those nice dark tones in, it's time to re-add some contrast back into the drawing, and to do that I use an eraser. I like to use either the Kneaded eraser or Tombo mono eraser, or even both, and I just gently lift up the highlights in the drawing. So the rose petals had a lot of light source hitting them, and also little tiny specks of light on the outer parts of the petal and the stalk as well. So it's really important to capture that for its realistic value. I will use the Kneaded eraser for larger and softer highlights, and the Tombo mono eraser for more precise and harsher highlights. And I just find that adding in those highlights at the end really finishes this piece off. So I'm just finishing off this rose drawing, and I do hope that you picked up lots of helpful tips in this video on drawing a rose yourself and also how to use charcoals and their property. If you are new around here, then don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit the bell so you never miss an update from me. I upload loads of arty content here on my channel each week, so I'd love to have you here joining me on all the fun. But anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye everyone!